My name's Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych. I'm a criminal psychologist and I run a business that enables me to bring knowledge and learning to everybody, not just those who are at schools, colleges and universities. And I do this by producing a range of blogs and vlogs like this one and free online courses. But I do also run slightly more in-depth courses which are both face-to-face and online. You don't need any previous qualifications to learn with me, and there are several subjects available. So once you've finished watching this video, why not head over to my website and see if any of those are of interest to you. This particular video is looking at the psychology of cults. Before I go on to talk about any specific cases, it's helpful for you to have some insight into the general psychology behind cults. There are two specific elements to this. There's the dominance of the leaders and the vulnerability of the followers. Of course, there are then important interactions between the two of them. Within the psychological research, there are a few different explanations for involvement in cults. Some researchers believe that involvement in cults is an evolutionary trait. We know that our bodies have evolved to adapt to our environment, and it's passed on from generation to generation. However, evolutionary psychologists suggest that our minds evolve in the same way. They propose that society and groups have changed so rapidly over the past few hundred years that we simply haven't been able to evolve our mind as quick. Therefore, they propose that involvement in cults occurs because we want and need to belong to small groups or tribes to satisfy a need for comfort. However, I personally reject this idea. If that was the case, we would all belong to one cult or another. I agree more with the social psychological explanations of involvement in cults. I'm going to outline a few areas within psychology first, then I'll explain how they relate to cult involvement. First of all, there's social learning theory. I have done a previous video on social learning theory and social control theory, so I will put a link to that in the video description. To summarise the theory though, it proposes that we learn through observing others and we then imitate their behaviour. Therefore, if we have family members or friends or relationships with those who are involved with some kind of a cult, we're more likely to copy that behaviour and join the cult. Secondly, the social identity theory. Tajvel in 1979 proposed that groups such as social classes, family, football teams and so on, which people belong to, were an important source of pride and self-esteem. Groups give us a sense of social identity. They give us a sense of belonging to the social world. And we divide groups of people into them and us based on a process of social categorisation. So we see our football team that we support as us and the opposition football team as them. Other groups have suggested that involvement in cults leads to a psychological process known as Stockholm Syndrome. Those who are intimidated, controlled or made to suffer begin to love, admire and sometimes sexually desire their controllers or their captors. This would certainly be relevant once a person is part of a cult, but that particular theory fails to explain why people would join the cult in the first place. Involvement in cults is extremely complex. Therefore, we do need to draw from several areas within psychology in order to attempt to explain it. Many researchers have even rejected the use of the word cult and prefer a more generic description of it. Cults can be seen as an organised group or a solitary person whose purpose is to dominate cult members by using psychological manipulation and pressure strategies. One thing that researchers do agree on is that those who join cults are vulnerable individuals. People are often surprised to learn that those who join cults are, for the most part, average people. They come from a variety of different backgrounds and different intellects, But research done in the past 2 decades has found that many people who are successfully recruited by cults are said to have very low self-esteem. This isn't to say that cult leaders actively seek out those with low self-esteem, or any other traits for that matter, but they can identify people who are more vulnerable, who are more susceptible to control. However, those with low self-esteem are easier to break down and then build back up in an effort to teach them that the cult is the supportive environment that they've been looking for. Many people who join cults are looking for emotional comfort and reassurance. Very often, they will have experienced some difficulties in their life, and the cult appears to be an attractive solution for this. They need to seek emotional comfort and reassurance, and that's a basic human instinct. Almost everyone attempts to satisfy this need in one way or another. People follow religions of various types. They go to places of worship and they pray to their gods of their choice, and that gives them some comfort to know that there's an entity bigger than them who can take care of them. For Christians, it's God. For Muslims, it's Allah. For Buddhists, it's Buddha. For pagans, it's the gods and goddesses of the various elements. For Scientologists, it's their own spiritual identity and a God which isn't described. Even those who profess to not believe in any particular religion may very well believe that energy still exists and cannot be destroyed or moved or transferred from one place to another. For babies or toddlers who can't comprehend religion, this comfort figure is their parents. All of these forms of religions or beliefs have some kind of structure. They satisfy a need for belonging within us, and they give us hope. However, when we become disillusioned with these beliefs, it causes anxiety and a deep sense of loss. Any number of events can trigger this sense of loss and this psychological trauma that follows. It could be the breaking down of a family. It could be a breaking down of an intimate relationship. It may even be the death of a loved one or a child. It could be drug use or abandonment of some kind. And this is the point at which people are most likely to join a cult. A study by Rooslet and colleagues found that the reason people joined a cult were most often due to spirituality, life dissatisfaction, and personal development. We have a basic human need for clarity. Many people join cults because they believe that they're being offered solid, absolute answers for questions such as good versus evil, religion, the meaning of life, politics, and so on. Many cult leaders promote messages that are simple and seem to make sense. They give a clear identification of satisfying a need. They offer a solution for life's problems. We, as non-cult members, can look at a cult and clearly see bizarre behaviour. However, for individuals within that cult, that behaviour seems perfectly normal to them. In fact, most people who are in a cult don't know that they're in a cult. These people are usually rational and intelligent individuals. The most difficult part of starting a cult is getting those first few people to have the same ideals that the leader does. Once a cult has a few followers, a few members, they use various psychological mechanisms to help to draw other people into it. Leaders of cults do tend to target certain characteristics within people. They'll use their powers of persuasion and maybe their narcissistic tendencies to target people's various vulnerabilities. They'll use emotions and they'll guide the new member to detach from any outside influences. New members are often what we call love bombed by the other members, and that creates a sense of belonging within the new individual. Cult leaders often promise potential or new members promises which are not available elsewhere, but they may be unattainable. For example, they might offer financial insecurity, an eternal afterlife, power or status within society in general. Having identified a stressed, emotionally vulnerable target, cults flood that person with affection, flattery, and validation. A researcher and lecturer called Ronald Loomis described this practice on college campuses as involving a recruiter approaching students and doing everything that they can to make the student feel special and feel unique. They're very quickly trying to convey the message that I am your new best friend. And they'll fake mutual interests in order to give the impression that they share many things in common. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of cults. The most obvious one to go for is Charles Manson. He's a very well documented case in the media for forming a cult. Charles Manson had spent a lot of his life incarcerated for various crimes before forming the cult. He had a troubled childhood and he was rejected by his mother. While he was in prison, he learned how to read people better. He began writing songs in jail, and when he was released, he joined the hippie movement and he would take LSD, as many other young people did at this time. He created himself to be a sort of guru type figure. He began recruiting members such as Susan Atkins by assuming a fatherly protective role for her. Susan had a troubled upbringing with alcoholic parents, and she was forced to work and fend for herself from a very early age. Manson offered her the comfort and security of a family that she'd simply never had before. Manson convinced her then that he was Jesus. Another follower named Patricia Kerrywinkle had been bullied at school for being overweight and for having excessive body hair. Manson showed her love and acceptance, and again he took on a fatherly protective role for her. Charles Manson had hoped to sign a record deal with producers, but he was subsequently rejected by the industry. This led him to convince his followers to go out and commit some horrific murders, and they did that unquestioningly. He was simply expressing his anger at the music industry and anger at this rejection, which he obviously felt from his mother from a young age as well, and he convinced people to go out and act on that. Another cult, which was named Heaven's Gate, convinced 39 people to commit mass suicide because they believed that a UFO was trailing the Hale-Bopp comet by killing themselves, and they'd be able to board the UFO. The followers had been recruited in exactly the same way. The leaders would identify some need and then claim to be able to give it to these people. They would manipulate the members into carrying out the will of the leaders. Cults such as these convince the followers to become indoctrinated. They close off any outside influences, and followers begin to become emotionally dependent on the group leader and on the other group members. Because the individual has been so cut off and dependent on the group, it then becomes very difficult to leave the cult. The behaviour and norms within the cult group is reinforced by each of the members. All of their behaviour is justified by the other group members, and it becomes normal to them. Their acts are rewarded by the authority figures that they depend on, and the cult leaders take advantage of this dependence, and they take advantage of their followers. In order to keep followers, cult leaders find ways to reinforce their beliefs and dependence on the groups. Cult leaders often maintain emotional control through various exercises which are meant to publicly humiliate a member. Cult leaders will repeat various lies and distortions until the followers find it difficult to distinguish between reality and cult life. They may scare members and repeatedly tell them and reinforce to them that they're at risk if they leave the group, and they offer them protection against the outside harm. Once a person has become part of a cult, it's very, very difficult to leave. Of course, these cult members may walk out at any given point under their own will, but they've become so brainwashed and been manipulated so heavily that they fear the outside world, and they see their little group or their cult as the only form of safety. When people do manage to leave cults, it's usually because they have the support and protection of family members, and they get psychological support following leaving that cult. I do hope that you've learned something from this short video on cults. Leave me a like or a comment if you enjoyed the video. Press subscribe. If you did like it, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. Bye for now.